Thank you so much for being here today. Thanks, Joe. Thanks a lot for this platform. And I'd like to give a big thanks to the students here. Thanks so much. Thank you. Thanks, Ben, Alex, and Liz. Okay, so the topic. I like the template, Waldorf College. I liked it. So the PTA factor, and I'm sorry, it should start with something very business, okay? It's very business. I'm saying that once again. Okay, so the PTA factor is, the preferential trade agreement. Okay, preferential trade agreement. We'll talk about it. What is a preferential trade agreement? Don't worry. And how that affects the trade and corruption relation. That is the idea of this moment, okay? Now, the corruption to begin with, and as you can see, October 4th today, and we'll start with this. So I'm the first one. So corruption and trade. What is corruption? Corruption is, we all know this one, okay? This is the evil that exists from the ancient times here. In all the societies, if you just go back and read all the ancient texts, if there is something to deal with anything in economics, corruption is always there, okay? So corruption is something which is there, which would be something like a very a perennial problem, if I may say so, okay? Now, how trade right now, we are in an era which is the post-globalized era. And in that era, how free trade can change the corruption level in an economy. That's the idea of this study, okay? So it re-explodes the trade and corruption relationship. It investigates the impact of a preferential trade agreement on the institutional structure of a country. And the institutional structure essentially is corruption here. Now, when we are talking about corruption, corruption is political corruption here, which is, you can say, bureaucratic corruption. The corruption is not really, say, financial corruption could be there. If we think of Enron, there was financial corruption in that case. But we are talking about political corruption, when the political parties or when the government employees are using their powers for a private gain, not for the public. That's called corruption. That's called political corruption, okay? So this is the corruption that we are dealing with here. Now, corruption hampers overall growth and development. There are studies that can say about this. So the studies are Morrow, it's 1998 and 1995. It says that it reduces economic growth, distort government expenditure. So it's really like you are not using your resources properly if there is a corruption. Okay. Similarly, Way in the year 2000 says that it returns foreign direct investment. And foreign direct investment in business is the key issue right now in international business. What is the amount of foreign direct investment? Okay? And finally, the study by a Princeton survey in the year 2003 shows that it reduces the effectiveness of foreign aid. This is very important for the African countries. If you just go back, and you will find that African countries are receiving huge amount of foreign aids always. But the corruption is at a such pervasive level out there that even if there is a huge foreign aid, that's not going to help their economic growth. Okay. And there are studies that talks about that corruption reduces trade. The studies like Olson from 1965 up to, so this is an NBE or a National Bureau of Economic Research working paper in the year 2007. It all exhibits that corruption reduces trade. Okay, and how corruption coupled with lack of contract enforcement reduces trade openness. Now, trade openness, you don't have to get overburdened with this term. Trade openness is simply free trade. Okay, so corruption reduces free trade. Yes, Ben? Okay, that's my habit to ask this one. Okay, so corruption coupled with lack of contract enforcement reduces trade openness. Lack of contract enforcement is like where you are, the government is not operating fully at an efficient manner. So all the contracts that are there between two parties, maybe they are the business parties, that contracts are not getting completely enforced by the regulatory framework because of corruption. Okay? So this is how corruption can reduce trade, and if corruption reduces trade right now, that's a big problem because in a post-globalized era, trade is the key issue that can promote economic growth. The engine of economic growth is trade. Okay. So, but these studies, again, there is a contradiction. Always you will find in a business literature, especially in economics literature, there are contradictions with all the studies. So Knack and Ashford in the year 2003 said that these studies are primarily driven by a sample selection bias. What is a sample selection bias? A sample selection bias is when you are dealing with a very small set of samples, not really the entire population. Okay. So here, for all these studies, they were dealing with a small set of countries which are really the developed countries. Probably that's why you can have a very different effect. Okay. And that's really the motivation of this paper as well. What we are trying to see is how trade openness, if a country engages into a free trade, how that can help to reduce your domestic corruption, domestic political corruption. Okay? So determinants of corruption. First, there is the trade restrictions. If there is trade restrictions like tariff and quota, that can reduce your efficiency in the bureaucratic level, or in other words, that can increase the level of corruption. Why? If there is a trade restriction, that implies that the domestic producers are benefited from that trade restriction. So they are not utilizing their resources efficiently to make their product more innovative. Because right now they think there is a trade restriction, the import commodities cannot come to the market, so there is no point for us to improve the quality of our product. If that is the scenario, then trade restrictions increases corruption. Is that clear? Okay. What is trade openness? We would assume that if there is a trade openness, that should reduce corruption. Because trade openness implies that the foreign investors are coming into the market. If foreign investors